Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. A long time ago, when I was courting my wife, one of the things we like to do on the weekends, if we could ever get a weekend free, I was still working at the medical examiner, was hop in our car and tool over to a little town in Georgia. And in this town, they had this massive antique warehouse. Now, one of the things that was so intriguing about this particular location is that all of the antiques came from Europe, primarily Great Britain. And this is how it would go. These antiques arrived packaged in these gigantic wooden crates. And the people that wanted these, that ran antique stores, would merely go down sight unseen and bid on each individual crate, not knowing what was contained in them. I was always fascinated by that, right? It's almost like Cracker Jack, right? Only you're spending quite a bit of cash. And then he would tell us when we would go over there about what it was like to open one of these things and find what was contained within. Some of it was junk and some of it was really, really cool. And we actually picked up a few pieces. As a matter of fact, I've still got over 100-year-old English pub table that we eat at every day. But can you imagine, for 1 second, buying a house sight unseen on bid because there's been a foreclosure action? Amazing, right? You can't go in the house. You can walk around it. And you don't get to go in until you get the keys. Then on that day, you walk up, slide the key in the doorknob, and turn it, and you walk in, and here's your new property. But to your great surprise, as you walk through that property, you don't find a dead body. You find 3, and they're all skeletons. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Hey, Brother Dave, good to see you again. Real quick before we get started, I wanted to send a quick shout out to a buddy of mine, but specifically his mother. And her name is actually Betty George. And Betty has been listening to us for a long time. As a matter of fact, ever since we started. And I just wanted to send you best wishes. Hope you're doing well, Betty. And make sure that you keep Mitchell in line. I know that we all have our crosses in life, and Mitchell is certainly one you must bear, but keep him in line. But we're going to send this greeting out to Betty right now. So I hope you're doing well, my friend.
I love that name, Betty.
I know, isn't it great?
It reminds me of like World War II. It's not saying that you're old, Betty, but it is a World War II name.
It is.
I mean, think of it. It's like Betty Spaghetti from A League of Their Own. Betty Rubble from Barney, and anyway.
I miss those old. Hey, my mother's name is Louise, and you don't hear those really cool names like that.
Betty
that
and
much
Louise.
Anymore.
Well, Thelma and Louise.
Yeah.
Betty and Wilma.
Yeah.
We'll have to do a whole show
unfortunately, people do things now like name their children after salads. So I don't understand.
No. They just make it up. They make.
I'm
not kidding. People are sitting in there going, okay, how many letters in the alphabet and how? Okay.
Let's see how creative we can get.
Look, man, Lamangelo is not. Sorry, it's not a name.
There you go.
Holy free holies. But here is a name, Joe. Jack Skellington. When I started seeing this story, I thought of Nightmare Before Christmas. I thought of the little skeletons,
Oh, yeah.
And I thought, okay, this is going to be one of those stories where they tell the whole thing and then you find out that the skeletons were fake. They were left over from Halloween, something like that. No. This is a sad story on so many levels because, A, this is a foreclosed home, meaning somebody lost this home. Somebody bought this home, had big dreams about what they were going to do with this home, and then something happened along the way that caused them to miss enough payments that the mortgage company foreclosed on them. It didn't happen back in 2007, 8, 9, 10 when all the criminal activity was going on and thousands of Americans were foreclosed on illegally. We're not talking about then. We're talking about in the recent past. This home was originally bought in 2019. Not originally. It was bought in 2019 for the last time, and the family that bought it lost it. The home was foreclosed. The names that we're dealing with here, because you can find all this in public records, who bought the home last. You can go back through everything. I remember doing this on a couple other stories where the story that we were being told didn't match up with the facts. And you start looking at public records, and you find out pretty quickly that a family, Paul and Sally Ann Cash, bought this home. It's at 7 Stanwich Lane in Burlington, Connecticut. And you know how I got this so wrong? Because Burlington, Vermont. That's what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking Burlington, Connecticut. And so I wrote down a bunch of stuff on this and started looking up Vermont. And I couldn't find anything in public records. And that's why. Burlington, Connecticut. This is a beautiful home, Joe. I don't know if you've looked at the pictures. Sits off the road a little bit. And sadly, the Cashes lost the home to foreclosure. And it was part of an auction. And in this auction, prospective buyers, were not allowed to go inside. They were able to get all the public documents, that the home had been lived in recently. They get power records and all those things. But you can't go inside and look and see. You can get appraisal values and things like that. So it's not like you're going in blindfolded. But in this particular case, Joseph Scott Morgan, blindfolds would have come in handy.
Yeah.
Dude wins this thing at auction, bought it for about half of what it was worth. And he goes, I'm going to be honest with you, man. I thought for sure somebody would have walked into this home. I mean, somebody somewhere before they sold this home at auction would have gone in to just make sure, that this didn't happen. But the new home buyer gets the keys to his house that he bought at auction, and he shows up there to check out this investment property, and he calls the highway patrol because he finds skeletons in the house. 3 of them, Joe.
Yeah.
3 human skeletons. Not fake, just skeletons. Now, I don't know, and I need you to help me understand this. When you walk in and see skeletons, do they still have like hair? Do they have like sitting in their clothes? Because in my mind, I'm picturing 3 people sitting on the floor, Indian style, playing cards.
Yeah.
And carbon monoxide gets them or something, and they die. And when the guy shows up, there they are, still in their clothing. Is that what we're talking about?
Yeah, it's hard to know. A lot of it is going to be dependent, as we've often said, relative to decomposition on ambient environmental temperature, exposure to the elements. And you say, well, they're in a house. Well, you don't know what the status of the house is. Keep in mind, this is a house that if you were a potential buyer, which I got a lot of questions that would be directed at the state of Connecticut about this, because it seems to be there could be some liability here relative to what you're exposing potential buyers to.
I'll tell you, dude, I've actually got some interesting stuff to share with you about this.
Yeah, and I'm shocked. Can I tell you a quick little aside about a skeleton real quick that
am I going to get nightmares from this, man?
Yeah, you probably will. I still do, but it's got a kind of an interesting little hook at the end. I had a lady that was found by homeless people in a home that they broke into to try to get shelter. And when they broke into it, there was this foul odor, and it was in a rather decent neighborhood in Atlanta. And they walked through the house, and in the back of the house, there was a bathtub. And this is the stuff out of Silence of the Lambs. There's that one scene where Foster's character walks into that one room down in the basement, and there's a body in a bathtub. That's what this looked like, literally. This lady had essentially liquefied in the bathtub, and they ran out and flagged down an Atlanta police officer. I wound up going out there and had to stick my hands into this tub. I had to put on a Tyvek suit, and of course, you're
Dude.
trying to be careful because you don't know how she died. She died in a bathtub full of water, but the skin, a goodly portion of the skin had kind of liquefied, pulled away from the skeleton, and was sitting in the bottom of the bathtub along with the bones. Some of the stuff had become disarticulated. There were fly husks everywhere. You can tell just multi-generations of insects had come through here. And at the time, I don't know what it was about the house and about it was really off-putting for me. I know you say, wow, that's a shock. Well, compared to other,
all I was thinking, is that what it took?
Yeah.
It had to go this far to
Yeah.
a lady taking a bath and dies, and nobody
and
finds her.
liquefies. Yeah, I know.
Generations of flies telling stories to their grandchildren, flies, about when I first found this person taking a bath. I hopped
gotta
on the
tell
soap.
you, it was something. And I don't know if I was distracted to the point where I didn't, and this is key, where I didn't pay as good of attention at the scene as I should have. I had an idea of who she might be, but because of bills that were found around the house, when people still got bills in the mail, and, sifting through her mail and everything, and didn't do as thorough a job as I should have maybe at that particular time to try to locate it. Went back out like several days later with one of my colleagues and went into her bedroom, and I'm still digging, to try to find things. Dave, both of her bedside tables, you couldn't get the drawers completely open. And if I can't open a drawer, it bugs me. And so I pull and pull. The first one finally pops open. And when I did pop that open, there was $20,000 in cash in the bottom of the drawer. It was kind of a recessed bottom. And guess what? Went to the other one. Same thing happened again.
Wow. I can just hear you now. Hey, buddy, I unstuck the drawer. Find anything? No.
Well,
Nothing.
Trust me, the little devil for a second popped up on my shoulder. The angel won. We went back and cataloged all of this cash with with the serial numbers and everything, and this has got kind of a cool wraparound. Couldn't find her family for the longest, and finally located a niece that was living in Ohio, and I think this was providential. Her niece, when we contacted her, she said, yeah, I haven't talked to my auntie in a long, long time. We used to be very, very close. And you're the only living relative, and we have her personal property here. And she said, oh, what is it? And I said, well, the home is here. That's going to have to go through probate and everything else. I said, there's cash. And I said, it's a rather large sum of cash. We don't like having it around here because we had it back in our, in our safe. Yeah. And Dave, her son, this lady didn't have any insurance, and her son needed leg surgery that required $35,000. And she got that cash, and the kid got that surgery done.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's why, I think back to that,
wow.
If you're tenacious it's not all about, trying to find a killer or something like that as an investigator. You never know what road it's going to lead you down in that particular case. So I'm thinking about these people that died in this house as an investigator. What was there, that you could dig through and try to find? Now, obviously, you don't have bodies in bathtubs and this sort of thing, but they would have encountered these generational groupings of flies. It might not be as foul as this lady's house because you've moved to the point where they're actually identifying skeletal remains. And it's not that skeletal remains don't have a foul odor, because they do, but it's not as prolific. Say, for instance, if you have large bloated bodies that are there and you catch them in that midpoint.
But wait a minute, but a skeletal remains after, and let's just go to the extreme here. There's no soft tissue. There's still going to be an odor.
No. I can't. Let's don't say that, because this is interesting. We've never talked about this on body bags. You can actually find desiccated tissue on the surface of skeletal remains. And look, I'm going to be very blunt here, and this is, a bit disgusting, but it's body bags, right? So the tissue that you see many times is, it almost looks like really, really thin, translucent beef jerky. And the bones themselves still have this kind of fatty grease on them. So it's not like if you ever think about some movie that's taking place out in the desert and you see bleached bones, brother, it ain't like that. That's not what
Wow.
you get when you get an interior skeletal remain, unless they have been buried in a spot within an interior location for a protracted period of time. You're still
You
going to
know,
have that kind of greasy residue that's there.
I'm guessing there's not a lot of obesity that runs in legal death investigators, because y'all couldn't eat half the time. Either you'd be, but let
You'd
me
be
ask you something.
you'd be
Yeah,
surprised.
yeah, we can get used to anything, but some of the things you've told me that
Yeah.
that you've said in conversations, I later on I've gone, dude, that's serious desensitization, But all right, in the case of Suzanne Morphew, you remember when her body was found? Her husband is
Barry.
allegedly,
Yeah.
yeah, Barry Morphew has been accused, arrested, and charged in her murder. But do you remember when they found her bones?
Yep.
Her skeletal remains had been bleached.
Hmm.
They were found out in an area where I still want to know what all happened there,
I do
because
too.
I was thinking about the skeletal remains here found inside this house, this
Hmm.
foreclosed on home, and how long it takes, to get to a certain point where they would be skeletonized, because these are skeletal remains inside a home, whereas Suzanne Morphew's remains were found out in the open when they were actually found, but there was no flesh at all. They were, if I remember, it seemed like they'd been cleaned, you
I
know?
know, and that, yeah, and I love the fact that you made that not bleach but bleached, like an
Yeah,
action word. And
right.
remember, bleach had come up in that case.
Hmm.
You remember
Yeah,
the
in the
smell of
hotel room.
bleach at the hotel room.
Yeah, the chlorine
So
for the pool is what they
yeah, and
said.
as that case begins to develop, I'm going to be very curious. I'm going to be watching that.
We're gonna
Uh,
revisit that one.
yeah, we will. We will on
Okay.
body bags. We certainly will.
All
But
right.
in the meantime, with our case up in Connecticut, we've got 3 human remains all contained in the same space that this family would have had access to, right?
Mm-hmm.
The question is, they're skeletons now, but what brought them to their end? Dave, you know that table I was telling you about, that English pub table?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've wanted to fix it for so long. I really have, but Kim will not let me come near it with a drill or a screwdriver. It's kind of wobbly, and both of us are terrified that we're going to do something to it.
Oh,
But
okay.
I'm terrified that if we don't shore this thing up sooner than later, uh, Noah and Lexi are not going to be able to inherit this thing. It's just going to be a pile of rubble. And so, I've got to do something about this. Uh, can you imagine if bodies are inside of this house? What else is there? And I've been in homes that have been abandoned with bodies in them, and you
Right.
walk through every room, and it is just you're knee deep in filth, paper, furniture that is unattended things. Don't even open the refrigerator, that
Oh,
kind of
buddy.
thing, because it's a horror show in and of itself. Um, Kind of amazing things here when you think about this as a death investigation, because it is a death investigation. All you know is that you've got 3 dead
Right.
people.
And by the way, just because you know who the owners had been before the
Yep.
house was foreclosed on, you can't assume. You know, one thing that you've taught me, Joe, is that every death is a homicide until proven differently.
Mm-hmm.
And I wish more of our friends that cover crime would approach such stories like this in that same vein. We would not have a lot of the discussions like with Nolan Wells right now if it had been approached as a homicide until proven differently. There would
Or
be a lot
Nancy
less
Guthrie.
discussion. Yeah. Oh gosh. Yes. But in this case, 4:46 p.m. Okay. The highway patrol gets called, and I found skeletons in the house I just bought. This happened in June, okay? Just 8 weeks ago. Wow. Yeah. So when highway patrol gets there, or the investigation begins, and they find no signs of forced entry, No signs of foul play. The cause and manner of death has not been determined yet. It's right now pending further investigation, which I'm a little curious as to how you would go about this. But before you dig in, Joe, the buyer of the house, his name is Edward Marchion of Newington, Connecticut.
God bless him.
His name has been kind of kept off to the side in a lot of places,
Yeah.
but it is popping up now. And the reason I'm saying is because, look, man, this guy bought the home fair and square. It was an as-is auction. You buy it and you hope it doesn't fall down around you, kind of thing.
Right.
But bidding was he bought it for over $500,000, Joe, $525,000, and
Wait, hang on.
was
Let me go back just for a second because
yeah,
he bought it for half of the estimated value, correct?
about 800,000, I think 900,000 was.
I'm
the
just saying,
value.
in this region of
Yeah.
the country, I've got friends that live up in that area,
Mhm.
and the
Yeah.
prices on things, and for us down here,
Right.
out here where we live, those numbers are mind blowing. And
Right.
he's bought, just $500,000.
Yeah,
Just
it's not a castle,
yeah. There you go.
but it's
Wow.
nice. It's a nice home.
Yeah, it is. It is.
But he did buy it at a foreclosure auction for $525,000. It was sold as is. Prospective buyers were not allowed to inspect the interior before bidding. The home was purchased on June 6th. Okay, now it's over a week later when he actually has a chance to go and take a look at his new acquisition. Once he gets there and opens the door and finds the skeletons and calls the troopers, immediately the police take over. Got to figure out what happened. You can't just say, well, these are the skeletons of the people who used to live here, because you can't even assume that.
No.
You don't know where they are. I mentioned earlier who the people were that owned it. Sally Ann Cash and her husband, Paul. They have a son named Brian Cash. He's 22. So they were living in the home prior to it being foreclosed. But, foreclosure takes time. It doesn't happen like being evicted from a house. It takes longer than that. It takes time to go through the entire process. It takes time to get it into a bidding where it can be sold at auction. So you're usually dealing with a year or 2 years down the road from the time a house is foreclosed on. Not always, but it can. So where do police start, Joe? Where do you start with the investigation? I found skeletons in this new property I just bought. It looks like they were living here and died. That's what it looks like.
Excellent question. And I'm going to start back where, relative to what the court told the prospective buyers, I'm going to inspect the outside of the house. Matter of fact, if you walk in like with the state troopers that walked in, and they initiate these first steps in the investigation, we ain't touching nothing. We're not. Matter of fact, we're going to back out, and we're going to go ahead and get a warrant at this point in time. We're going to wait on the warrant. We're either going to have a judge that's available or a magistrate that can issue a warrant. I'm going to go to the county prosecutor's office or state AG, whoever they're dealing with, and I want a search warrant issued. And the probable cause relative to this is 3 deceased individuals. All right. It's not even, look, if we go with this idea that every death is a homicide until proven otherwise, it's, even if this was in singular form and, one skeletal remain, the question I always have when there are skeletal remains is, how has somebody been ignored this long from a scientific perspective, where their bodies can be rendered down to this point? And that rendering, you don't know what the source of this rendering is. Is it a natural occurrence, or is this something that was done at the hands of some kind of maniac? You say, Morgan, you got to be kidding me. You would actually consider that? Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to consider it. All the stuff that Brother Dave and I cover on this show, you don't think I'm going to consider that? Yeah, I'm going to consider it. I'm going to look at these cases one by one, assuming that this is death at the hands of another. So when you back out of this house and you wait for that search warrant, I'm going to spend my time doing external investigations or external observations. When you do a search warrant, and this is kind of fascinating for folks that don't understand. You have to be very specific on a search warrant. Like, you can't just say, I want a search warrant for number 18 Elm Street. All right. I want a search warrant for number 18 Elm Street, and these are the locations in the house that we're going to search. And you have to list those and what your purpose
And what you're
is
looking for.
and
Yeah.
and what you're looking for. Now, you can kind of treat this a bit broadly, I think, if you're going to do a search warrant here, and it takes time. And it's weird. You'll see the old folks that have been doing this for a while. They'll be very patient. They might have one guy will say, "Hey guys, y'all want some coffee?" Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, matter of fact, let me buy this round. Here's a couple of bucks. Go buy some coffee. And then you've got the new people that are out there, and they're like, why can't we go in? We don't understand. Why can't we go on? Don't you understand? There's dead bodies in there. Right. There
They're
are.
not going
And
anywhere.
they're not going to rise from the dead. They are in there. All right. So it's going to be okay. You'll have plenty of work to do when it gets here. Enjoy this respite for a moment. As a matter of fact, go and make sure
Wow.
that you got all your equipment ready and everything you're going to need to process the scene. That's what you need to be occupied, and get your mind right before you go in. Because one of the other things that you're going to do outside in a case this, and it would be complex, you're going to have to come up with a plan, because you don't want to just walk through the door and say, okay, guys, here, take some photos, and, we're going to pull a few measurements and out we go. No, probably what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure the ME's people are there from the state medical examiner. Connecticut has a state ME's office. I'm going to make sure their reps are there. And if I already know that I'm talking about skeletal remains, you know what I might do? I might go ahead and call the state forensic anthropologist. And it doesn't have to be a buried body to get them involved, because there are certain skeletal elements, this is kind of cool, that I might not be paying attention for, that these people have been trained for, that if they walk up on a body in the middle of a floor, they can visualize a body at the scene and then say, wait, something's missing. We're missing an element here. You guys go this way, you guys go that way, look and see if you can find it. And they'll, forensic anthropologists will actually start looking for things like scat from animals, raccoon feces, rodent feces, anything that they can get an indication where something may have been taken and drugged back to a burrow. I've worked cases involving forensic anthropologists where there's been a bird nest and there was actually human hair in the bird nest, that the birds had come by, grabbed hair off of the dead body and flown to a bird's nest and literally feathered their nest with it.
Oh my
So yeah,
gosh.
you don't want to walk into a situation so potentially complex here that you don't know whether you're coming or going at this point in time. And so when you go in, you're going to break this down into teams, and because it can get very overwhelming if you've got just a single investigator that works each one of these bodies. How can you keep track of it? Well, if we've got a set of three, my preference for three is a police investigator, an ME investigator, and a photographer. Okay. 3 people, 3 teams, each of you get a body, and each person simultaneously starts processing each one of those bodies. We do that with mass homicides. You don't walk into a mass homicide like the Buckhead shooting all those years ago. I've referenced it in the past, Columbine. You don't walk into an event like that and you've got one person working all of the bodies, because you get distracted. You have to remain focused. And when you're talking about skeletal elements, it's like somebody many times has taken a jigsaw puzzle and just gone like that, and they've thrown everything all over the place. The ideal would be to have a body that is still contained in the clothing and nothing has been touched. But of course, we know it ain't a perfect world, particularly when the living are trying to assess the dead. Brother Dave, one of my biggest fears anytime I work a skeletal remain case is I've left something behind. And it's one thing to be able to grab a group of coworkers at a scene, and you take a body and you place the body into a body bag, you zip the body up, okay, and everybody grabs a handle, and you go and you place it on the gurney. Gurney goes in the back of the transport, and off you go. With skeletal remains, it ain't that simple, brother. You just, because you've got over 200 bones in the human body, right? All you have to do is look back at Sarah Connor, and she said that in Terminator. uh, you look back at that and you think about, all of the remains that could potentially be missing. And it's amazing that if it could be just one little element, skeletal element, that's going to tell the truth, particularly if you're talking about something where a skull, for instance, has been fragmented and you're missing. Remember, I talked about a jigsaw puzzle. You're missing that one key piece
Right.
that if you're trying to put this thing back together, it can be problematic if you're missing it.
All right. Now, in this particular case, there is an idea of who it could be.
Yeah.
So rather than coming on a tent out in the middle of the woods with no documentation of anybody anywhere and finding 3 skeletons,
Yeah.
in this house, we have a house that was owned by a family. And Paul and Sally Ann Cash bought the home in 2019. It's foreclosed on. And by the way, I wanted to get the date straight here. The home was foreclosed on August a year ago, and they already moved it up to sell it in June. So it was no time between foreclosure. It took time to get to the foreclosure, but boy, once they did, boom, you're gone. And it was sold. Now, that's probably, I'm guessing, Joe, where you would wisely start in trying to identify who these skeletons are. Would you do a parallel investigation? Start with the skeletons and the family that lived here, because we did have a mom, dad, and an adult son that were all cohabitating. They were living in this home.
Yeah.
And then start another blind one? Or do we go with what appears to be obvious for the sake of time and money? Because you don't know how they died. You don't know if somebody came and killed them in the middle of the night and left. We don't know if there's a murderer on the loose, or if you don't know anything. So you got to identify who it is first. How do you go about doing that? Who starts?
Yeah, this is kind of a dangerous road to be on, because, we've talked about levels of identification before.
Yeah.
And me, I would rather have an unidentified body than to have a presumptively identified body, because you're really sticking your neck out when you say.
And by the way,
yeah,
I'm so glad you just said that, because they have identified 2, but not the third. And I'm going to tell you that they won't go on that limb, Joe. The
Good
state,
for them.
They will not. I tried. I'm like, come on, just tell me.
I know. Yeah, you want that information, but for
They
that
do not have
moment, that
confirmation.
moment of peace that you might receive by getting some kind of governmental rubber stamp and say, presumptively it's this person. It's that same thing that's going to happen 6 months later when that individual that you have identified is walking through the local Ralphs or Safeways or Publix buying groceries. And, can you imagine that? And there's a case that still haunts me to this day. I had a lady that was partially consumed by her dogs that lived with her, and we had to presumptively identify her. She had no living relatives. We couldn't do DNA on her. And so we did a presumptive. I mean, the top of her torso was completely gone, with the exception of the remainder of her skull. The lower torso was still there. We could determine that this was an African-American female, but everything else was gone.
What kind of dogs did she have?
A variety of mutts.
Oh, okay.
A variety of mutts, and she was a dog mom. She had 5, and they were locked up in the house with her. I think it was 6 months downrange. And, I still think back to that case today, and I'm not going to say it haunts me, but it's troubling because it was a presumptive ID. And kudos to the folks up in Connecticut that aren't just saying, blindly that this is this individual. I think my question to this point is, how did you get the other 2 identified, right?
Right.
Now,
but hey, can I go back to your other story?
Yeah,
real
sure,
quick?
please. Yeah.
You said it haunts you that, you did a presumptive identification on the woman
Yeah.
because the dogs had eaten. Was the identification wrong?
No, it was
Okay.
to this point it hasn't been wrong,
Okay.
or I haven't
But
been
you just live with
informed
that
of.
fear that you had to
Yeah,
you had to
yeah.
take
I
okay.
don't like to
Okay.
leave loose
Yeah.
ends.
I can
Boy,
just
that sounded kind of
oh.
sinister, didn't it?
Well, no. Yeah.
I don't like to
You
leave
know,
loose ends.
my
Yeah,
wife,
and
LaDonna, used to say, if anything ever happens to me, Dave, and they come in here and look at the books you have,
yeah, I
you're
know.
done.
Right, I know.
But
Yeah. So
we did have a story where there was an identification, where parents were told their daughter was dead, and other parents were told their daughter is alive, but in intensive care or whatever, and ended up being wrong. They had the wrong identity because they used, I believe, driver's license,
yeah,
and so
the college female college
yeah.
volleyball team. It that case haunts me, and I wasn't involved in it. And it's because the coroner in that jurisdiction used a driver's license in order to effect an ID. I never use government. Those are merely starting points. I love science, brother. And so if I can start with a driver's license, cool. But I'm not going to be reliant. I've had too many cases involving fake IDs. And to this point, you might find, let's just say with the unidentified skeleton in this particular case, we very well might have a state issued ID, a driver's license. Okay, I'm not going to use that other than to merely start the investigation. I need something confirmatory. So, with that said, here's what I would throw out there. We've got a mom and a son identified, right?
Right now we do. Of the three skeletons, we have Sally Ann Cash. She's 54.
Right.
And her son, Brian Cash, was 22. They were identified as two of the three skeletons found inside the home.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, this is if this son is his biological, the unidentified skeleton,
Mhm.
if there is familial connection to the son's remains that have already been identified, I'm wondering if they're going to do a DNA profile on the son and do a comparison to those unidentified remains that you have that might be paternal remains. And I'm just thinking about that and thinking about any of the other peripheral relatives that might still be around in that area. Does this other victim who they may have tentatively identified or they have an ID, are they going out and seeking families or family members who they think it could be and going back and saying, we need a buccal mucosal swab on you. We're going to compare the DNA. I know that they could probably get DNA off the skeleton more than likely. And the skull is missing. They could go for the teeth. They could go for the petrous bone we've talked about extensively inside of the cranial vault. There's any number of locations that we could potentially go to try to run this information down.
Joe, in this particular instance where you have skeletonized remains, when they died comes into play here because the home was foreclosed on. Okay. Now, if the third skeleton ends up being Paul Cash, when did he die?
Yeah.
When did Sally Ann die? They were the owners of the home. And if the homeowners were dead, then the action, the foreclosure and the auction, if it determines on when they died, okay? Because they died before the auction, obviously. I mean, you don't turn into a skeleton between June 6th and June 14th. I think we can assume that, right?
Yes, you're absolutely right.
We know that foreclosure began in August, but between August and June, and we're talking about Connecticut. So is it possible that human remains inside a dwelling could become skeletonized in that period of time?
You would need a protracted period of time for them to be totally skeletonized. Okay. And this is a great point that you bring up, Dave. You'd be a stellar investigator because this is the way you're thinking. The idea is it's not so much about what you have as much as it is how does what you have compare to everything else that you have. So if you're looking for comparing and contrasting the bodies that you have, are they the same level of decay? All right. There's a classic image, and I think it's can't remember. I think it's in Spitz and Fisher that I've talked about before, relative to a husband and wife that died at the same time, and the wife they had an attic bedroom. Husband was downstairs in the lower bedroom, and the husband was relatively well preserved. The wife was almost completely skeletonized, and it's because of the heat.
Oh,
And so wherever you are positioned in a house, and those photos, I can recall those images in my mind that I saw as a young investigator when I was reading years and years ago. That's always resonated with me. And so when you see the remains, where are they relative to one another? Um, was there anything in that house that could have impacted their rate of decay? Had air been running the entire time? Had power been shut off? That's key, because if you're talking about a foreclosure, somebody's not paying their money. I don't know. That's Con Ed. Con Ed is going to flip the switch or pull the plug, and you're not going to have air running in there. So that's already a factor. And then I want to know also, um, if there's any kind of obvious weapons that are found around there, because
oh yeah.
on other than maybe a lightning strike, I have never worked a case, and even with lightning strike, I think I had 2 people die as a result of a lightning strike, and of course that was outdoors. It wasn't indoors. How do 3 people simultaneously drop dead? Well, you mentioned one off the top of your head. That was carbon monoxide, right?
Yep.
And there are a number of cases out there. I worked a case involving a family of 6, I think, or 5 in New Orleans, where the vent fan was reversed on their heater, and all of them died overnight. There have been other cases. There's a kind of an infamous one up in Milwaukee that happened many years ago that I'm familiar with. And that's something that can happen, where you would have something that would impact people all together at one time in a particular space. But I also want to know about any kind of weaponry. And that's why it's so important that you get these skeletal remains intact as much as you can, so that you can examine them, look at them, and see if anything has affected them. I'm also going to want to know, aside from carbon monoxide, I want to check and see if the heating system functions correctly. I also want to assess if there are any kind of poisonous agents that are around there. Did they have where the table set? Where everything is still laid on the table. Can you imagine how spooky this is? You know what my favorite book is in the whole world is Great Expectations, Charles Dickens, and
Right.
Mrs. Habersham. In that book, that character that Dickens writes about, the table in her home is still set with her wedding celebration. She got
Wow.
abandoned, and she walks around in a wedding dress, and this is decades and decades later. There's a moldy old wedding cake and all that sort of stuff. But when you go into a house and you see a table that's set, it is kind of creepy. Dishes are in the sink.
Right.
You can still see pots and pans on the stove where people have prepped meals, and they just die, and all that stuff kind of freezes in time.
Wow.
So all of that stuff has to be assessed at that moment in
And
time.
actually, it's important here, Joe, because if it can be proved that the owners of the home, Paul and Sally and Cash, if they died before the foreclosure,
Yeah.
then the foreclosure is evacuated. It's not
It's null and void.
it's
Yeah.
null and void. So, and what they've done already, Joe, just so we're crystal clear on this, I want to make sure everybody knows. Everything on this property stopped because before it went to closing, once they found these skeletons and an investigation had to be done, the house did not sell. They did not close, and it's been kicked because now we've got Sally Ann and the son identified, pending identification of the husband, and then we got to find how did they die, which we still don't know. We don't have toxicology. We don't have anything. We don't know. We just know we have 3 skeletons of apparently the people who used to live in the home before it was foreclosed. But this foreclosure would be kicked out, and the family, the heirs, would have an opportunity to bring it up and sell it then. So there are a lot of reasons, financial reasons, why they've got to figure out who these skeletons are and when and how they died. It's important.
It is. And so with that said, it's going to be, just from a forensic standpoint, friends, this is going to be a fascinating case to watch because isn't it interesting if this thing makes it into civil court, which there's a high probability it could, we might actually see both a forensic pathologist and a forensic anthropologist testify in civil court, not criminal court, to determine time of death. And you know me, I'm your ever-present forensic nerd. That's fascinating stuff to me. And so I'm going to keep my eye on it, as I know that Brother Dave will, and we're going to revisit this case because, I don't know, inquiring minds want to know. Certainly, those of us here at Body Bags want to know. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.